Hello everybody, happy day. I would like to say today we're going to talk about an exciting and inventive and enthusiastically designed presentation, but we're really not. It's about organizational design and structure. Most people follow that with a yawn. Very true. But it is at the heart of an organization. It's the heart of what you produce and what you sell. Where marketing meets finance and HR meets IT. And if you design the organization correctly and you structure it appropriately, you have a pretty good shot at delivering the objectives that your organization was designed to meet, to create. So organizational design and structure is quite important. How does that come into play in relation to what we want to do as a buyer and a seller? In particular, seller, right? So we have a product, and let's just say our product is cupcakes. Pretty easy, right? So we work at home and we make the world's best cupcake. We find out that all of our friends and family love our cupcakes, and they say, you need to sell this. You need to sell it online. So what do? We figure out a way that we can make more cupcakes, because there's no way that we can make as many cupcakes as we need to in just one or two ovens that we have at home. Even if we buy pop-up ovens and bake ovens, whatever you call them, even microwaves, you can't make enough. We have to have conventional, commercial type ovens. And if you want to make a lot of product, you have to have quite a few employees to help you make it. One person makes one person output. If you have more persons, you can have many more outputs. So then we say, hey, what can we do? Let's create an organization that'll make as many cupcakes as possible. And then let's also get people to help us sell it. We need people to help us package it after we get people that take the order. Then we have to ship it. Oh, and by the way, we need people to manage our money, because we're going to have more money coming in, some money going out, and hopefully more money left over for profits. I've just named about 6 or 8 divisions just related to an idea about cupcakes. Is that realistic? Let's talk about Sherry's Berries. Sherry's Berries started because this individual started to make chocolate-covered strawberries in their home. People liked the idea. It was pretty novel. And then they said, well, what if you sold these strawberries throughout the town, throughout the state, throughout the country? I don't know how to do that. Let's create an organization that does that. Now, Sherry's Berries is a multi-million-dollar operation. They just don't sell, by the way, strawberries anymore. They have many different types of fruits that they sell. You can buy bears. You can buy cookies. They sell just about anything related to some kind of anniversary, even balloons. It all started out of the home. How? Just with strawberries, dipping strawberries in chocolate. And she created an organization that facilitates the growth of her idea into something much larger. That is where design and structure of an organization becomes so critical. Of course, there's different designs and structures. Each industry has their own design and structure. As we go through these presentational slides, we're going to look at some of the characteristics and traits that make an organization unique. And then we're going to talk about how best to design an organization that meets the needs of your particular ambition. We'll start with the 2 general types of models that we have in organizations. They're called mechanistic and organic. Those are the 2 types of organizations that we see. Name just about any organization in the world, and we can name it as either a mechanistic or an organic. That's how easy it is, and that's how universal these 2 different types of models are. Sure, there's other types of models, but generally they fall into a mechanistic. As we start defining these types of organizations, you're going to go, oh yeah, that's mechanistic. Oh, that's certainly organic. There's hybrids, of course, but generally it's going to fall into those categories. The mechanistic is more rigid and tightly controlled. It tends to be more of an efficient manner in which a product or service is developed. They deal with high specialization, rigid departmentalization, clear chain of command, narrow spans of control, centralization, and high formalization. All of those terms we're going to talk about later and define them. What we need to know is mechanistic tends to be more process and program oriented. Everybody has a job. Every duty has a process that needs to be followed in order to complete it. Best example may be the post office. Doesn't mean it's a bad or good organization. The post office tends to be very mechanistic. If you have a letter that you want to get mailed, what do? You seal that letter and you put it in a mailbox. Somebody grabs that mail and they take it to a processing center. Then it gets distributed throughout the processing center. Then it's taken throughout the country. And then from there, they take these bulk packages of mail, which are usually town-specific by that point, and then they put it into your individual mailbox. Very rigid, very tightly controlled, very process-oriented. It's like building a car, right? Once you design the car, which follows an organic or organistic type of process, but once you start to build the car, it becomes very mechanic. In fact, my son and daughter and our family went and toured one of these plants that make vehicles. It was the Corvette plant, and it's in Bowling Green, Kentucky. My son's really into cars, still is. Wanted to find out how they built the car, so we went to the Corvette plant. It's really interesting to see how that happens. But everybody has a job, everybody has a duty, everybody has a responsibility. That's where this high specialization, rigid departmentalization, clear chain of command, narrow spans of control, very centralized, and high formalization. The opposite is organic. Is an organic type of structure. We all know what the word organic means. More free-flowing, right? Highly adaptive, flexible, concentrate on flexibility and employee contributions. You tend to deal with teams in organic. You have a free flow of communication and information, wider spans of control. It's more decentralized with a low formalization. Think about any technical or technology-laden firm, and they tend to be more organic. Obviously, Facebook. Obviously, Twitter. They rely more on the contributions and the ideas of employees. As a result, they want to design a structure where ideas flow very easily throughout the organization. Organizations are built on ideas in this regard. And so ideas have to travel throughout the organization so that something can be done about the organization and its ideas. The organization, in fact, facilitates the transmission of ideas throughout the organization. So you have to have a structure, which follows a design, that allows this type of free-flowing, wide spans of information throughout the organization. Information is often distributed with channels, and so you have to try to have as many channels as possible so that people can talk to each other. In fact, if you look at some of the design of organizations, for instance, Facebook comes to mind, even Google, they tend to have fewer offices. Fewer offices tend to have more cubicles, and even the cubicles are usually gathered around what we call clusters. You have 4 and 5 together. Very few walls in these organizations, and more spaces where people can congregate. Those spaces tend to have couches and coffee machines. The thought is that people get together and exchange their ideas. That was some of the concern with COVID, that people weren't going to get together anymore and develop relationships and exchange ideas. So there was a big move to create these types of models, or at least opportunities for interactions, where people can at least exchange their ideas in a very free-flowing form that was conducive to the exchange of ideas. 2 types of models. That's what design is. We take those models, organic, mechanistic, and then we design some type of structure from there. We'll talk about structure in a second, but whether some organization is mechanistic or organic depends on four general areas: the strategy, size, technology, and the degree of environmental uncertainty. Talk about strategy. If you have an innovative type of strategy within your organization, again, Facebook, you're going to be more organic. Innovation is about ideas. If you have a cost minimization, Walmart comes to mind, Target. You want to tightly control costs, and as a result of tightly controlling costs, you're going to have more control over what is spent. That is mechanistic. You're going to have more layers of authority to make sure, since profits are so elusive, and the margins between costs and profits are so small, that you want to make sure that you control your operations. That's going to be mechanistic. Imitation is where you copy market leaders. That's mechanistic. Again, Facebook, which somewhat is a great case study to follow, followed MySpace. MySpace became, in some ways, Facebook. Facebook just did it better. We can talk going back 50 to 100 years. Apple certainly wasn't the first computer organization. Even Hewlett-Packard before them. There'll be another company that dominates phones like Apple does. And there has been and will be another firm that dominates software, similar to Microsoft. In fact, if you look at just the sale of goods and services, it started with the corner drugstore, the corner store that sold certain products. Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, grew up in a store, and it was the local market where people bought most of their goods. That led to more regional types of stores, where in a city they had one larger store. Many of these corner stores went out of business. Larger stores were able to buy in bulk. They bought cheaper, and they were able to sell cheaper. Corner stores couldn't. From there, we got from this large store in a city to the more mega stores. That became the Walmarts, and Walmart dominated for 20 or 30 years. Then we had Amazon. Says you don't need to drive to a store. In fact, we'll just mail it to you. We'll give you free shipping. Amazon now dominates in so many of the areas. About 16% of all commerce is through the skies, e-commerce. And that has doubled and tripled over the years as transportation costs have lessened and people have become more used to, I need something today, I need something tomorrow, I'll just order it online. People are more familiar with ordering online. Second is size. Size depends on your design. The larger the size, the more mechanistic you become. If you generally have more than 2,000 employees, you tend to be more mechanistic, if not mechanistic. Now, of course, there's some large organizations that are not mechanistic. But that's just a general rule of thumb, because you tend to have more departments, and you tend to have more centralization because you want to control more of what the organization does. There's more layers that you have to follow in order to achieve your objectives. Size does dictate the type of design. And there's two more aspects that determine the actual design. Technology. Technology is the conversion. It's conversion of inputs to outputs. The better you can convert an input to an output, the better chance you have of making money, of making profits. A good example is McDonald's. If you had to make as many fries as they do in a day, it'd be very time consuming if you did it by hand. It's all done by a certain type of machine. In fact, when a McDonald's store gets their fries, they're already cut up. In fact, they put them in bags, and all you have to do is put the bag into the wire basket. That automatically goes into the oil. At the end of so many minutes, that basket comes up. They even have mechanisms that turn the basket and put the salt on the fries. That doesn't have to be done anymore. There are even processes that then take the fries and put them into bags. The average McDonald's today has 50% fewer employees than they did in the 1960s. 50%. It's amazing. So technology and the size of the technology that you use, often called size of production, does affect the structure and the design. So if you're in small batches, you tend to be organic. If you're making some bracelets or something that requires more hand-eye coordination, or certainly much more input from employees, then you tend to be more organic. If you're making large batches, it tends to be mechanistic. If you look at how they make beer or just about any type of mass food, it's very mechanistic. In fact, you'll see very few employees there. And if there's a process production, it tends to be more organic, where you have continuous processes. The general rule is that organizations adopt structure to their technology. So depending on what you make is depending on the type of organization design you're going to create. And the last aspect that impacts technology is what we call environmental uncertainty. The more uncertain your environment, the more you need the contributions of your employees. Oil is a great example. Oil industries tend to be more adaptable. Most people think, no, it's very mechanistic. They're very adaptable to their organizations. Their organizations are very adaptable to their customers and environments. Therefore, they tend to be more organic. Of course, the actual nature of taking oil out of the ground can be more mechanistic, but it does require quite a bit of the contributions, the thoughts of employees. Those are the four aspects that impact the design of an organization: strategy and size, technology, and environmental uncertainty. So let's talk about structure. Now we know how we're going to design an organization. Now let's fill it up. It's almost like saying I want to build a house. This is the way I want to design it. Now let's talk about what the house is going to look like inside. Let's move the walls around. Let's move this bathroom over here. Let's move this kitchen over here. Let's have X number of bathrooms, X number of offices. That's what structure is. Within the overall design that we've created for an organization, now let's figure out what needs to go inside. It's the formal arrangement of duties throughout the organization. Duties are often categorized into jobs, so you can say it's a formal arrangement of jobs within the organization. Best way to understand organizational structure is an organizational chart, which is a graphical representation of positions and tasks. So once we design the organization, once we know that, hey, we need to make 2,000 cars a day, as a result of making 2,000 cars a day, we need a mechanistic type of organization. As a result, we're going to look at work specialization, departmentalization, chain of command, span of control, centralization, formalization. Based on me just saying mechanistic, we all know that it's going to be where we're going to be on this range in relation to the organizational structure. Departmentalization, very departmentally oriented. Chain of command is going to be very tight. Span of control, very small. Centralization, absolutely centralized when we're dealing with cars and large-scale productions. And very formalized, which means everybody has somebody that they report to. You must go through your chain of command. And so ideas are going to be tightly controlled. They're not going to free flow throughout the organization. And that's going to work in that type of organization. Others, it may not work. Let's talk about each one to get more familiar with, as we did with the organizational design and determining what type of design we need. Let's talk about the structure that we need. And we'll start with work specialization. This describes dividing work activities into separate job tasks. It's rare to have one individual perform the entire task, except when you start a business. We end this presentation with a great quote, and I'm going to save it. But when you're an organizational founder, you often do all the tasks yourself. No one else can do marketing or management or insurance or manage the books. You typically do it by yourself or maybe one or two other people. That's where the term multitask works well. You're doing many different tasks. You're not only, in this case, making the cupcakes, you're actually selling them. And then you're shipping them. And when the money comes in, you're investing that money. And as the organization grows, you have more people come into the organization to help you. You can't ship as much as you like. You certainly can't bake as much as you like when you have more. It's just not physically possible. Then you have specialization. Maybe at some point with your cupcakes, you have one person that all they do is frosting. Maybe one person, all they do is mix the batter. Maybe 1 or 2 or 10 or 20 people, all they do is bake. They take the ingredients, put them into the canisters, into the cupcake holders, and they just bake the cupcakes. That's all they do. There's some great advantages to work specialization, including it does reduce boredom, but it can increase fatigue, it can increase stress, and it can increase poor quality. Why? People do the same thing every day, they get bored. So if you look at the opposite of work specialization and you have people change job, we call that job rotation, that's a good thing. It does reduce boredom, it does reduce fatigue, it does reduce stress, it does reduce poor quality. So, although you may have a highly specialized workplace and workforce, that doesn't mean that there aren't management actions that can't be taken to ensure that even in a mechanistic environment, you have high quality and even high success. Departmentalization is where you take these job tasks and you group them into certain departments. Work is then done in a more coordinated and integrated manner. For instance, all of finance working together, all of sales working together. In fact, finance and human resources work quite well together. They both deal with people, and people tend to be the largest expense of an organization. So the person who oversees HR often oversees finance, or you may have a person in charge of finance, in charge of HR, and together there's somebody above them that manages both. Departments are also often categorized or grouped by function, product, geographical areas, process, or customers. So you could have a group departmentalized by function. HR is a good example. By product, if you're selling tires, it could be heavy-duty tires, or it could just be regular tires, commercial tires, residential tires, tractor tires. It could be geographical. We sell in the south, the southwest, the west, the east, the southeast. And because you need to be closer to a customer, you have a geographical area. And then you could talk about process. If it's a natural flow, then you group by that. But if there's a requirement, there's much more coordination, you would have a different type of process. Then there's customers. It's fairly typical for large organizations to specialize for selling their product to governments, consumers, producers. They often have different requirements, maybe even different encouragements, enhancements that they have on a certain product. You make products differently for the government than you would for others. For instance, governments tend to have a need for a more plain type of car without some of the what we would call bells and whistles. Government tends to be much more concerned with being seen as spending taxpayer money frivolously. It brings us to two more. Chain of command. Chain of command tends to be much lower in mechanistic. The line of authority extending from the upper to the lower is what is known as chain of command, or the reporting relationship. Mechanistic, which means there's more control, then you're going to have a very definitive line from an employee to a supervisor. For that reason, if you have a wide chain of command, then what you have is more of an organic. You allow individuals to do more of the work on their own without direct supervision. It's very similar to span of control, which is the number of employees a manager effectively manages. The chain of command and span of control often work hand in hand. However, the difference may be with the chain of command, and we think of the military, it's very rigid. The military expects people who work underneath an individual or underneath a division to report to that division and not to go outside that division. It's a very clear and direct chain of command. a word you may hear, a phrase is, don't violate the chain of command. They want you to make sure that you go to your supervisor first, and only after that could you go above your supervisor. Span of control is becoming more and more, or greater and greater. The use of supervisors and managers is becoming less prominent, mainly because we can communicate with our employees much easier and more direct than ever before. A single tweet can reach millions of individuals, so you don't need a supervisor to take the message to each department or division. A CEO can send a message to every single employee at any time that they want. So the span of control continues to increase. Centralization and decentralization, many of those factors culminate into what's called a centralized or decentralized type of system. A centralized system is the degree to which decision-making is coordinated into fewer people. A decentralized is where lower-level employees have a greater input into the decision-making of the organization. Centralization deals with formalization, spans of control, chain of command. A centralization basically says employee thoughts and perspectives are not as important as their work. Decentralized says we need the thoughts and opinions from everybody. Ritz-Carlton, which is a very, very famous chain of hotels, wants their employees, no matter who they are, who they report to, they want them to be able to solve problems. They empower their employees to do whatever it takes to make sure a guest is treated well. So it's very decentralized. A person doesn't need to go to their supervisor to make a decision or to request a decision if they feel that they can resolve an issue that a customer has. What determines the level of centralization? If it's a stable environment, if there's lower level employees are less capable, you tend to be more centralized. But as employees are becoming more knowledgeable, we can see they're becoming more capable. We can see that the level of centralization is coming down, becoming more decentralized. If decisions are relatively minor, then it becomes more decentralized. There's no reason to take a decision up if the consequences of that decision are not great. If an organization faces a crisis, it tends to be more centralized. And again, the larger the organization, the more centralized or mechanistic they become. Formalization can greatly enhance an organization that is trying to grow and they need to take care of their resources well. But formalization also means that it inhibits some of the creativity and idea-generating aspects that come from employees who are able to converse widely throughout the organization and whose ideas are heard by those in decision-making capabilities. We tend to move towards a more informal type of organization. Formalization and centralization inhibit the idea-generating aspects of an organization, as I mentioned. And because organizations are becoming more idea-laden, which means that it's the idea that can determine whether an organization is successful or not successful, we tend to move towards less formalization, less centralization, a greater span of control. And even chain of command is becoming less of an issue. It's the idea that is prominent, not who has the idea. Which takes us to key points. We now have learned that no one right structure design works best. Depends on, secondly, the type of industries that you have. Generally speaking, industries determine whether an organization is organic or mechanistic. But the type of formal prescribed structures are becoming outdated. They're seen as not being innovative and creative in an arena where the best idea needs to be rushed to market and taken advantage of, which we call a competitive advantage, as quickly as possible before your competitors could determine the same idea. And those first three bullets lead into the last one, which is there is a preference for adaptable fluid structures that allow for employee contributions, participations, and ideas. The key throughout this whole presentation is the prevalence and presence of ideas. One final quote. If you're big and slow, you'll get small fast. If you're small and big, you'll get small fast. Or if you're small and fast, you'll get big fast. So for those organizations that are big and slow, they're going to get small because the formalization, the centralization, is going to inhibit their ability to innovate their ideas at the rate at which our economy is moving. But if you're small and fast, you're going to get big. You're going to get big because you're going to get successful, and that's what small and fast organizations do. The trick is, when you find yourself getting big and slow as an organization, you've got to make sure that you continually adapt your structure to ensure that ideas flow from the bottom to the top and all throughout all corners of the organization, so that the key for an organization today, the absolute key for organizations to be successful today, is to generate the ideas that differentiate their organization from any other in their industry, and that continue to attract the customers that keep that organization in prominence. Everybody enjoy the day. Take care.